I'm Mwalimu DeLuca, and welcome to my Anthro Nerd Book Club. I love books. I'm so excited. These are some of my favorite books about refugees and immigrants, a mix-up of official ethnographies and fiction. And so I'm going to start with anthropology, and one actually written by a good friend of mine, Elizabeth Dunn, which is just coming out, and it's called No Path Home. Elizabeth has taught at the University of Colorado. She's currently at the University of Indiana, and this book is about her deep research in the Republic of Georgia. And she doesn't just look at the refugees themselves, but the whole logic of humanitarianism. What is that logic? What about the policies and how that affects the people on the ground? So No Path Home by Elizabeth Dunn, number one. Second, I'm going to talk about Lisa Malki and her book Purity in Exile, Violence, Memory, and National Cosmology. That's quite a mouthful, but just remember the Purity in Exile piece. It's about Hutu refugees, and again, we're back to the whole genocide situation in the Lakes region. Burundi and Rwanda are neighbors, and their experience fleeing to Tanzania, living in exile. It's a very theoretically sophisticated. So if you're one of those Anthro students who just loves to read Foucault and lots of theory and get really up on the theory of displaced people, this is the book for you. Number three in the Anthropology Book Club, Making Refuge, Somali Bantu Refugees in Lewiston, Maine. Can you imagine being from Somalia and moving to Maine? It's got to be one of the coldest states in our country. So there's a little backstory to this. I actually got to meet Catherine Vesterman at the University of Colorado when Carol McGranahan and a number of graduate students were having a conference on immigration, on globalization. And so she told her story of having done field work with Somali Bantus and then coming here and getting separated from them during the war, and then actually being at, she teaches at Colby College, being at a conference, and some of the people she had worked with 20 years ago showed up, and it was just a really exciting moment. So she talks deeply about the cultural aspects of what it's like to be a Somali Bantu refugee, also what it was like for this relatively urban, homogeneous, industrial town in Maine to get such an influx of newcomers. So another anthropology high. So number four, this book, The Displaced, it's a very short book, and what I like the most is it's from an immigrant insider perspective, refugee writers on refugee lives. So that's not something we always get a chance to see, because very often refugees are so busy working. They only get 3 months of rent and a small stipend when they come here, and so immediately they're plunged into a situation where they're working or going to school. And this was a unique collaboration. Viet Thanh Nguyen, Pulitzer Prize winning author, who pulled together a group of refugee writers, and so you really get an insider perspective on places from around the world. The Parent Who Stays, To Walk in Their Shoes, written by refugees themselves. This book, The Middle of Everywhere by Mary PIPHER. Mary PIPHER is an anthropologist, but she writes a lot like a journalist, helping refugees enter the American community. She spent a lot of time in classrooms, in English as a second language classrooms in Lincoln, Nebraska. Why Lincoln, Nebraska? VOLAGs, or voluntary agencies, placed a lot of refugees there because it was a place that was thought to have a robust economy and relatively low cost of living. So again, you've got a situation, Nebraska, fairly homogenous, but welcoming in newcomers. So it's not just about the refugees, but also about the community, the American community welcoming them. So number six, I'm going to switch it up a little bit here. This isn't actually about refugees per se, but Behold the Dreamers by Mbola Mbue is a novel, and it takes place in New York. Even though it's fiction, I think you know that a lot of fiction can be based on real life, and it's about a Cameroonian immigrant family. The father ends up being a driver, lives in Harlem, comes to the US, and is there during the kind of economic breakdown of the Lehman Brothers. He's a driver for kind of a high executive, And it's kind of a clash of these two very unique and different families and their interactions with each other. Cameroon is currently experiencing somewhat of crisis, and there are a lot of asylees and asylees coming from Cameroon because there's tension between the French and English-speaking areas, former colonies of Cameroon. Number 7, this is my book, so I don't want to be too narcissistic here. But one of the things I really love about it, it was amazing to write it together with Leah Bassoff. I'm an anthropologist, so I went deep on the history. There's a glossary. It's about the experience of the Sudanese lost girls in Kakuma, in Sudan, and what they experienced. But it was wonderful to work with a writer who could say, yes, let's go deep in the anthropology and make it authentic, but also tell an engaging story. All of the characters are composite, so it's kind of an experiment in writing. You could call it factional, ethnographic fiction. Lost Girl Found. So number 8, What is the What? So What is the What? Best-selling collaboration with Dave Egger and Valentino Echek-Deng. I had the opportunity to meet Valentino Echek-Deng when he was at the Conference on World Affairs, one of the real highlights at the University of Colorado, which takes place in spring, in April every year. Valentino is just a charismatic man. When you read this book, if you've ever had a down day and you feel like you're really struggling, read this book. He literally has experienced more trauma than 20 people might in a lifetime, and yet he still exhibits a lot of resilience. It's a really well written in kind of a flashback style, together with Dave Eggers. And Dave Eggers, if you remember, also lost his parents, so he had some kind of an empathy for this situation and wrote about it in one of his other best-selling books. So number 9, if you want to go even deeper on what they meant for evil with Rebecca Deng, please watch my interview with Rebecca Deng. She's a refugee from Sudan, and what I really love about this is a woman author, this is a refugee author writing about her own experience. So again, we have that insider or emic perspective. Rebecca, again, is very inspiring and went through a great deal. She was really inspired by her grandmother. We learn a lot about her grandmother. How a lost girl of Sudan found healing, peace, and purpose in the midst of suffering. Number 10, by Warren St. John, Outcasts United. This, if you love sports, if you love football, or what Americans call soccer, this is about a refugee team with a really diverse group from all over the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, DRC, and actually coached by a female immigrant herself. And it takes place in Atlanta, and it's almost as much about the sport, unifying them, giving them a sense of resilience. Many of them had parents who were working who weren't there when they got home from school. They were struggling to adapt to a really different cultural setting, weather, all those things. And so this ended up being a very healing team for them. It ended up being like a family for them, and it's a really powerful book. So it takes place in Clarkston, Georgia, what was once a small, sleepy town and now a growing, globalizing place. And some of the conflicts, again, between newcomers and old-timers. Okay, so I told you I only was going to have 10 in my book club, but I had to add just a few. Helen Thorpe is another local author, and The Newcomers is about South High in Denver, right near Wash Park. And she goes in, does research. She's a journalist. She's not an anthropologist, but journalism and anthropology can intersect at times. She spent a lot of time with the students in the ELA class, and that stands for English Language Acquisition. Many articles were written about the teacher, Eddie Williams, a very inspiring teacher who spoke Spanish, and also his mother had Mexican heritage, so he had a lot of empathy and was really also almost like a family member, really helping students way beyond language, but cultural adjustment, what it's like to be in America, what it's like to ride the bus in Denver during a snowstorm. So great book. It is very much of an outsider perspective, And in one of my classes, people felt there was a little bit of a tin ear when she compared her experience as an Irish immigrant to being a refugee, but I really like the depth of research that Helen Thorpe does. She's a seasoned journalist, so I really highly recommend this book. And last but not least, I think it's really important to include youth. And this is a book, Refugees and Migrants, for Children in Our World. Sometimes children hear words that are hard to understand, they don't know what they mean. So using beautiful artwork and explanations that are basically at kind of a 3rd or 4th grade level. Where do they come from? Answering questions about refugees, what it's like to live in a refugee camp, what happens when they arrive. This is a great addition for a global classroom, and again, we start young with that kind of awareness and that knowledge. Also great if somebody thinks they want to become a teacher and use that knowledge with students. I hope you liked these books, and if you'd like more recommendations, reach out to me. Put a comment below or reach out to me at laura.alaimo, ALAIMO, @gmail.com, and tell me your favorite book. Share what you're interested in, or I can also provide others. So looking forward to hearing from you.